Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome all of you. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the fourth and final installment of Musing, a storytelling series. True stories, as remembered, told by the people who lived them. My name is Seth Fox. I'm the curator for Musing. And honestly, it has been such a pleasure the past 10 weeks working with the 5 storytellers you'll be hearing from tonight. They've all worked so very hard for this very moment to share with you their very human experiences. Their stories are sure to make you laugh, touch your heart, and may even inspire you to someday tell your own story. Every Musing event is based on a theme. So far this season, the themes have been music, movies, and me, stories about the music and movies that shape us. It seemed like a good idea at the time, stories about the best of intentions and their unforeseen consequences. Our last event was life and death, stories about starts and stops, beginnings and endings, renewal and letting go. And tonight, we're exploring the theme of home, stories about where we come from, where we end up, and where we fit in. And you are in for a real treat. Again, all the stories you'll be hearing tonight are true, no fictions. A quick bit of housekeeping, if you would please make sure your cell phones are silenced or turned off before we begin, that would be great. That way the storytellers won't be distracted and it won't interrupt the people around you, okay? All right, let's get going. Our first storyteller this evening is a public speaking coach. She loves all things art related and also enjoys snuggling the goats on her 150-plus-year-old farm. Yeah. Her energy is irrepressible. You're really going to enjoy her. Please welcome to the stage, Tina Bakehouse.
When you get married, you make sacrifices and must be open to compromise. You agree as to which side of the bed is yours, and you agree where you'll spend your holidays, even developing new traditions. And you agree which way the toilet paper should roll. The answer is over, as 70% of wipers would agree with me. When I met my long, lean, hunky Farmer John husband, who resembles the actor and character A.J. Simon from that 1980s big hit Simon and Simon, at salsa dance lessons on a warm summer evening in August of 2003, I fell in love with all of him, even open to all the sacrifices. I was okay with letting go of the convenience of having a Blockbuster and a grocery store just a 2-minute drive away. I was okay with increasing my commute from 10 minutes to 50 minutes. And I was okay with my closest friends becoming cows, cats, and a lab retriever Seamus. For farm life wasn't foreign to me. I'd grown up on the farm with cows and pigs and dogs. But after living in the city for 10 years, I still loved my farm roots, but embraced my life with a New York City or LA flair. What I wasn't prepared for, however, was how our farm expanded rather quickly. It all started with my husband deciding that he wanted chickens, free-range chickens, all in the name of soil health, to getting a text on my phone that says, I might have bought 7 goats. We now have 30, again, for soil health. But when he comes home with this teeny tiny cardboard box and an awkward looking turkey that's head is larger than its body, triangular in shape, he must have got a good deal at Orscheln. I'm thinking, what in the heck are we going to do with this turkey? And I fast forward to all the things that I know about turkeys, how Benjamin Franklin wanted the turkey to be the national state bird, how turkeys can change their color based on their emotions. So the more intense the emotion, the more intense the color. And you can identify the gender of a turkey by the color of its poo. Not to mention that the yelps, the gobbles, and the keys can be super irritating, and that they're just stupid enough to look up into the sky and drown themselves with rain. Or maybe that's just a quirky myth. Well, my ever-proud Farmer John puts that little baby turkey into the coop with 17 other hens. And pretty soon, this turkey adapts, eats, and starts to believe that she too is just a really large chicken. In fact, Gilda, the turkey, becomes lead chicken. It's a warm, early fall day, and my 8-year-old's off at school, and I'd had a long day at work, and I'm coming up our long gravel driveway and enter our 1880s big white Victorian home. And I'm greeted by Farmer John in a wheelchair. I quickly drop my bag in the dark hallway, and I look at him, and my face is turning white. And he quickly says to me, "Hun, there's been an accident. I might have killed my ankle jumping out of the Maxim tractor." I gasp. And he says, "Well, and that's not all. Our hired hand quit today, left without saying goodbye." 2 gasps. And he continues. I'm thinking, there's more? That means you and our son Anderson are in charge of chores. 3 larger-than-life gasps. Now, don't get me wrong. I grew up on a farm, and I love animals, but a turkey, I'm just not a fan. He can tell that my wheels are spinning in my head and about 100 miles an hour, and he's trying to ease my anxiety, and he says, "Hun, it's really no big deal. The turkey takes care of herself. She just wanders the farm, eats free-range food. All you have to do is open the coop first thing in the morning and close it at night before it gets too dark." Fair, easy enough. We finish supper, and my son agrees to accompany me. Anderson comes out, and my husband wants to be moral support, so he hobbles along with his crutches right behind us. And as we're walking to the coop, I'm really taking in that warm summer, last of summer breeze and that sun as it's beating down on those cottonwood leaves, and they start to glisten and sparkle. And with a fierce confidence, I climb over the fence, and I'm just lambasted with this really sharp, rotten egg chicken poo smell. I'm in it, and I'm walking slowly into the coop. Please, please, please have all the chickens and that turkey in there. And I count 17 hens. And of course, directly to the right is a straw bale outside of the coop, where Gilda is sitting, comfortably placed, not looking ready to budge at all. We stare into each other's eyes, sizing each other up. But Gilda has these really weird, marbly, beady eyes, and she's staring through me, almost scaring me into submission. I make a quick decision. I thought, we just need to get this done. I'll just scoot her into the coop, and I'll just shoo her right in. It's just right there. There's the door. And so I make this big lunge toward Gilda, and as I'm doing so, my husband's yelling, "Go slowly." Big mistake. Too late. Gilda gets up all on her feet, all Kodak Bear style, and screeches and squawks this sound I've never heard before that just sends me jumping up to the roof, hitting my head on the rafters. And I scream back at Gilda. And I've decided it's on. It is a full-blown turkey-human war. I put on my inner warrior, and I'm thinking I'm Apollo and she is Rocky. And as I'm picturing this in my mind, just how this is all going to go down, Gilda whacks me right in the face with her big wing. And I am speechless. She then whacks me again and again and again and again. And pretty soon it's back and forth with her wings. And I'm just standing there like battling these wings and taking feathers in my mouth. I have never been whacked so hard as I've been whacked by this turkey. Not only do turkeys have 3 times better vision than human beings, but her wingspan was at least 5 feet in length. And I am in this confined space. Unlike the cowardly lion that had a little bush to hide behind, I have nowhere to go. So I continue taking the abuse, one wing at a time, trying to push her in. And it's almost like this really awkward junior high girl fight over some weird boy in the hallway with nowhere to go with my arms. And in the midst of all of this, mind you, my husband's moral support comes out and he says, nothing. He's laughing. Guffaws. And we're not talking just he, ho, ho, like belly laughs. And in the midst of all this, I find the wherewithal to squat down and look at him with my beady little eyes and say, you're not helping the situation. And as I yell that and I get whacked one more hard time in the face, I feel a warm hand on my shoulder. It's Anderson. And he says, in a very calm voice, he says, Mom, you're freaking Gilda out. Slow down. I realized this goofy turkey was really taking on my weird, crazy lady, anxious energy. I was just rushing, trying to get it done all in that moment. So I step back and my son steps forward one small step. And in his Gandhi-like voice, he looks at Gilda and he says, okay, Gilda, it's bedtime. Why don't you go join your chicken friends? Without missing a beat, that turkey gets up and does this proud promenade and makes it to the doorway and looks at my son, looks at me, flaps her wings, gives a kee as if to say, well done, son. She makes her way inside the coop. And my son just looks at me, the turkey whisperer, and says, see, Mom, that wasn't so bad. You just gotta let them be. Just let them be. And how funny, I learned from my 8-year-old a pretty big lesson. Turkeys will be turkeys. You better let them be a turkey. Just let them be. And don't we all just want that? So a few days become weeks, and I grow this grudging respect for Gilda. She becomes popular poultry on the farm, leading all the hens to good food, and she does it with such turkey flair and fervor. And I start to like her, almost. Fast forward 3 months later, and Gilda the turkey makes her way into our home on a plate for Thanksgiving dinner. I'm thinking, letting you be, Gilda. I'm letting you be. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina B. All right, our second storyteller. He was the only 17-year-old disc jockey in South Dakota during the height of disco. He enjoys cycling, and he also enjoys collecting vintage stereos for his wax collection. Please welcome to the stage, Mr. Jim Milroy.
So has anybody ever asked you who you are? Has anybody asked you where you're from? Has anybody asked what you are? I've been asked that probably my entire life, varying degrees of answers and the way people pose them. So a little backstory. I wasn't born in this country. I was born on the other side of the world. And I looked probably a lot like the people who born me, but they didn't raise me. I was raised by parents from here that look a lot like you out there. They were white people, and they brought me to this country on Halloween in 1960. A week later, John F. Kennedy would be elected president, and it'd be the dawn of the new frontier. My family is kind of like the new frontier. My dad, he's from Canada, and he's the son of Scottish and English immigrants. My mother's from Wisconsin, and she is the daughter of Swedish immigrants, for sure. I have two older sisters, and what's unique in the family is that they actually share the same biological parents. I have a brother who's only 8 months older than me. We think he's probably Irish. We know he's from Des Moines, Iowa. I have two younger sisters. One growing up was Chippewa. She's now a member of the Ojibwe tribe. The other one was Sioux, and she's now a member of the Lakotan tribe. You know how people say that they're 1/4 Indian? My family is actually literally 1/4 Native. So in 1974, my dad, he's a physician. He decided to move us from the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul, to the middle of nowhere, and that is what we call South Dakota. It's in the northeast side of South Dakota, not the Black Hills side. And it's south only from North Dakota. But he's a physician, and he took a job with the Indian Health Service. So I should also tell you that all my life, I was the only person that looked like me in my class. Even into college, I was the only one who looked like me. Everybody looked kind of like you. I was the only one who looked like me in the school. I was the only one that looked like me in the block. In fact, as I just told you, I was the only one who looked like me in my family. So, moved to South Dakota, and I learned one thing is that people tend to hate the people they know the most. And what I mean by that is that there were no blacks to hate in Aberdeen, South Dakota. There were no Hispanics, no Jews. The Catholics, they went to a different school. But boy, there were Indians, and they hated Indians. So, I'm very dark-skinned. I had really long hair in the 70s, and I wore, like most people did, maybe cowboy clothes, cowboy boots and jeans and a jean jacket. So they assumed I was Indian and treated me that way. Lots of fights, lots of derogatory terms, things like that. I took it. I mean, my sisters actually were natives. So I learned that that's who they hated, and that was fine. You know, I was kind of used to that. So one day, the boys started talking about how their dads were going to get on top of the post office, the downtown post office. They're going to bring their deer rifles and their shotguns, and they were going to defend the city from the roof of the post office from AIM. And for those of you who don't remember AIM, that stands for the American Indian Movement. It was the Native Identity Movement. A year before, AIM had taken over Wounded Knee. So to say the least, many white people in South Dakota were scared to death of AIM. They were going to defend it. When Russell Means and Dennis Banks are coming to your town, apparently you jump on top of the post office with a gun. That kind of flashed me back to when I was growing up in St. Paul, Minnesota during the 60s. And every day I was called the N-word, believe it or not. I was called that because during the 60s, that's what was in the news, was the civil rights movement. And in 1968, Martin Luther King, as we know, was shot and killed. And all the kids in my third grade class talked about how they were going to burn the city down. They were going to burn the Twin Cities down. Might sound a little familiar. And then they'd eventually get to White Bear Lake, where we lived. We lived in a city called White Bear Lake, had a big lake, 10,000 white people, no bear. And after they burned the city, I would be the only one left in third grade because, remember, I was black in 1968. Well, as you can see, I survived the race riots in 1968, and I survived the occupation of the Aberdeen post office, 2 stories, in 1974. 1975, I got to go on a work trip with my dad. And again, he was a physician for the Indian Health Service. So that meant that we would go in a government-issued car, which also was a Plymouth with hubcaps and no air conditioning. And we drive from Aberdeen, South Dakota to Rosebud and Pine Ridge Reservation. Long ways. And then my dad would go work in the hospitals and clinics, and I would stay in this cinder block hotel with air conditioning at least, and free color TV. South Dakota has 1 television station though. So after so much Price is Right, I went out into the city and started walking around. Thought I'll explore the reservation towns, right? You know what? No one came up and asked me the normal questions. Who are you? What are you? Where are you from? And then it would always get to, what are you really? Nobody asked me that, and they had asked me that all my life. And I realized, I think they're not asking me that because they think I live here. They think I actually am a kid on the reservation. I'm a reservation dog in 1975. And I felt for the first time that I belonged somewhere. I actually belonged with these people who I absolutely do not belong to. But I did. Then at night, the doctors and their wives would invite my dad to their house for dinner. And my dad would say, hey, mind if I bring my son, Jimmy? They said, oh, yeah, we'd love to meet your son. And we'd get to their house, ring the doorbell, the door would open, and you could just see them staring and thinking, because my dad makes Marcus Welby look tan. And they're just wondering, what, where, how can this be? And my dad and me, we never volunteered that information because that's who we are. So jump to January 1976, I got to go on another trip with my dad. And this time it was in the winter of South Dakota, very bad. And we got to go to Tucson, Arizona. And 1976, for those of you who aren't old enough, we refer to as the bicentennial. So I jumped on a plane, second time I ever been on a plane in my life, and we flew to Tucson, Arizona. And we got there the weekend before his convention. And we went to Mexico, and we went to the Sonoran Desert. But the highlight was we went to this place called Old Tucson. And that's where they make all the movies, the Western movies. All those great movies where you'd see like Custer chasing Crazy Horse. And if you look closely, there's a mountain in the back, and there's a desert, and there's cactus. There ain't no cactus in South Dakota, but it is in the movies if you look closely. So we'd walk these sets, and it's really cool, and we'd pretend we were cowboys and Indians, dressed like a cowboy, right? I had that funny outfit on, and we just had a lot of fun. Then my dad, for the week, had to go to whatever conference he was going to. So I just, went into the city, took a bus, got in the city, and started walking around. And I discovered that you could go to these little places and get 4 tacos for $1. Taco joints. And these tacos were just stuffed with greasy beef, loaded with cheese, enough lettuce on top to spread salmonella across the whole Sonoran Desert. And they were all hard shell tacos, because there were no soft shells in the bicentennial. 4 for $1, and this wasn't even Tuesday. So I went from taco joint to taco joint, 4 for $1, 4 for $1, and then I finally would run out of them, and I'd jump on the bus again. And at every bus stop, there would be another taco place. And I did this for most of the week. And guess what didn't happen again? No one is asking, who are you? What are you? What are you really? No one said anything like that. In fact, I'm not sure what they said to me because they were talking to me in Spanish. And I looked around and I thought, everybody looks like me. They all have dark hair, really dark, about my height. We're all eating tacos. They think I'm Mexican. So I wasn't a cowboy and I wasn't an Indian in the bicentennial. I was a bandito. I wasn't a jet, I was a shark. So over the years, as I grew older, things started to change. You probably noticed that you started to see people that maybe looked like me. Maybe you worked with them. Maybe your kids went to school with them. Maybe you saw them on TV shows. But immigration started to happen from Asia. So people started to get used to what I was. Instead of asking what I was, they would generally kind of tell me what I was, which is different. It got so odd that even my mom went to Hawaii on a trip of a lifetime, came back, looked at me, and right away said, oh, Jimmy, I saw so many Hawaiian boys that look just like you. You might be Hawaiian. Probably not, Mom. Thank you. In fact, the other week, a woman in my neighborhood, I was mowing the lawn, comes up to me, and she I didn't know her, says, hello, I'm Vietnamese. Are you from Hawaii? Thinking, geez, I do get that a lot, actually. So eventually I left South Dakota. I married my high school sweetheart, Cheryl. And Cheryl looks as much like my parents' daughter should, as I do not look like my parents' son. And we moved down here, and eventually we had our own family, and we had kids. We had actually had a set of twins, Anne and Jen. And I should say that my daughters don't really look a lot like their mom. Thank God they act like their mom, but they look probably more like me. And when you have twins and they're just little infants and you're walking around the West Road and you got this double stroller, people love to tell you you have twins. They come up and say, "Oh my God, you have twins." That's right. And then they say we're blessed. But you know, it was different when my wife went out and I wasn't with her. And she took the double stroller out. And these people would come up, usually moms, go, "Oh my God, you have twins." Yeah. "Oh, you're so blessed." Yeah. And they'd look at her and go, "I mean, really, you're really blessed. I didn't think you could adopt twins." And my wife would look at him and go, "Well, no, I didn't adopt them. No, I had them. They're mine." And they'd look at him, and again, they'd have this look on their face like, who, what, where, how can this be? How can that be? Because they're Korean. And that's who I am. Aloha. Muchas gracias.
Great job. Great job, Jim. He was so nervous. I just kept telling him, "Man, you're solid. You're going to kill it." You killed it. Great job. Great job. I just love this. All right. So our next storyteller is the Dean of Students at Duchesne Academy. She enjoys reading. She enjoys watching PBS and occasionally hanging out with her husband. Please welcome to the stage, Amy Becker.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. January 12th, 2010 dawned like any other day, a little chaotic with a full day stretching out in front of me. It became a day I would never forget when I turned on NPR. The report of a massive earthquake outside of Port-au-Prince, Haiti, stopped me cold. I felt the weight of worry and dread grow all day as news trickled out of the country. The earthquake that brought Haiti to her knees changed my life forever. In June of 2004, my husband Thomas went on a service trip to the Dominican Republic with a group of students from Duchesne Academy. We had been interested in adoption, and this trip turned our focus towards Haiti and Holt International's program there. Over the next year, we completed home studies and psych evaluations and a mountain of paperwork. We were told the Haiti process was relatively new and to expect the unknowns. We signed on anyways, and our names went on a list of parents waiting to be matched with a child from Haiti. We waited a year. In June of 2006, we received an email with a file about a 2.5-year-old little girl. We were told to take our time, read the file carefully. Don't fall in love with the picture and forget to process this logically. I promptly fell in love with the picture, threw logic to the wind. This was my girl. Over the next 3 years, we would complete more paperwork and pray while our file sat idle in one ministry office or another. It seemed there was never any movement. I waited like an addict for the reports that would come every 3 months with photos and news about how our little girl was growing. Those reports soothed my soul and broke my heart. In the fall of 2009, we received word that there was a new step in the process. We must travel to Haiti, sign papers in a courthouse, meet our child. It would be a 3-day trip. We would meet and hold our little girl, but we would not be bringing her home with us. We flew into Port-au-Prince in the afternoon, and at 5:30 on October 10th, we met Violancia. I held her in my lap. I drank in her giant smile and large questioning eyes. We were surrounded by beautiful, gregarious children, all bearing bright smiles and a little bit of mischief. Only the promise of a whole day with Via pulled me away from the orphanage that night. We woke early and headed to his courthouse in a small village called Arcaye. Dress neatly, speak properly, be respectful. My husband and I definitely look like trouble. The courthouse was a large 3-sided building with a big table, some benches, and a motorcycle inside. We were taken to a room in the back that was filled with shelves and a desk, and there were spiral notebooks everywhere. A man came in, pulled a notebook from the stack, opened it, asked us to sign our names. We did. He closed the notebook, set it aside, shook our hands. We left. We spent an amazing day getting to know Violancia, and I never thought about that weird courthouse or that spiral notebook again. A full day of getting to know each other ended with me getting to tuck Violancia into bed. I was crying as I headed back towards the playground where our group had gathered. My husband was visiting with another couple who had traveled. They were in the same step of the process for adopting their Haitian son. And I just wasn't ready to be social yet. I noticed a caregiver holding a lovely baby boy, and I asked if I could hold him. He came willingly to me, and we shared a little baby talk, which helped to dry my tears. I handed him back. We flew to Omaha the next morning. After we returned home, I went on Holt International's website. And there on the screen was the little boy I had held, and surprise, his twin sister. I looked at Thomas, and he looked at me. One call to our social worker, Celeste, and the ball was rolling. We were in process for the twins. We scheduled the interview for the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. There was a brief moment of panic before the phone call. Could a pair of teachers really afford 5 kids? An hour later, our match with the twins was approved, and we never looked back. I immediately flew into paperwork mode. I could do nothing to bring Violancia home, but I could get an adoption contract completed and finish our dossier, and within weeks, I had both done. In our perfect yet reasonably realistic world, Violancia would come home in the fall of 2010 at age 5, and the twins would come home in the spring of 2012 at age 3.5. All we had to do was wait. On January 12th, 2010, when I first heard the news of the earthquake, I had 2 thoughts. One, are all those beautiful children and caregivers at Holt Fontana safe and unharmed? And selfishly, 2, how could my paperwork, that courthouse, those notebooks, survive? We waited all day as news trickled out of the country, and within a few hours, we did know that everyone at Holt was okay. And that was all we would know for days. After a period of time, other countries began to create plans to bring children in the adoption process out of Haiti, and finally, the United States joined in. Meanwhile, the images of death and destruction were filling the screen of each nightly newscast. It was like nothing I had seen before. Only Thomas's strength and his certainty that our children would come home kept me sane. On January 29th, not on January 29th, finally, about a week later, a plan was announced for children to be granted humanitarian parole if they met the requirements of the Haitian government. 1, a signed and completed adoption contract. 2, a picture of the child with the adoptive parent. And 3, USCIS Homeland Security approval to bring into the country a child from Haiti. For Violancia, I began to celebrate immediately. Paperwork, check. Photo with the child, thank God for that extra trip in October. USCIS approval, we had approval since before we were even matched with her. And I went to Homeland Security every year to have it updated and reapproved. Violancia was coming home. But the twins, we were just too early in the process. Paperwork, man, I was on that. Check. A photo with the child? It seemed hopeless. We didn't know we were adopting them when we were in Haiti. We hadn't even met the female twin. The day after the process was announced, I received an email with an attachment. It was a photo of me holding John on our last night in Haiti. Remember that couple we had traveled with? Auline had taken the photo on a whim and forgotten she'd had it. She was looking for her photo with her son and found it. Photo with the child? Check. USCIS approval seemed completely out of reach. And that's when Celeste called. Amy, she said, go get your paperwork. Celeste, I told her, I have hauled this paperwork back and forth from Homeland Security 4 times. I know the paperwork. But she insisted, and so I went. In 2005, when we applied for USCIS approval, we hadn't been matched with the child, and we said we were open to sibling groups. So our USCIS approval was left open. And there in box G, it said children. I had taken that paperwork back and forth to Homeland Security every year, and the government had never updated it. USCIS approval? Check. The twins were coming home. From a period of stagnant waiting, we flew into immediate hyperdrive. We had nothing for little children, let alone toddlers, and no idea when humanitarian parole would be granted. Friends and family swooped in, and the donations and the hand-me-downs came pouring in. On Friday, January 29th, we received a phone call from Homeland Security in Washington, D.C. We were given vague information and told our agency had more details, but that Violancia and Jeanette had been granted humanitarian parole. I was so excited, I almost hung up when I realized that was only 2 names. I said, wait, there's a twin. What about John? We have no further information. They hung up. I called Celeste. She called Holt. Nobody knew what happened. Plan the trip, they said. Get the girls. Let us figure it out. And so we did. On February 3rd, we arrived at the Miami Children's Home and were taken to our girls. I spotted Violancia right away, and her smile showed she recognized us. And there was Jeanette asleep on a cot. Violancia brought toys, and she and Thomas began to play, and I picked up Jeanette, and she finished her nap in my arms. When she woke, she looked at me and smiled, and then she snuggled into my chest, and her little hand found mine, and she held on tightly. A woman from the home came and said, maybe Jeanette needed a dry diaper. And I jumped up with her and said, I'll take her, I'll change her. And so she took me to this little room, and I'm standing in front of the changing table with the supplies all laid out, and I realize I haven't changed a diaper in a while. So I took off the wet diaper, threw it in the trash, reached for the clean diaper, and Jeanette promptly peed and soaked herself. The emotions of the day caught up with me, and I burst into tears. I'm sorry, I told her. I'll get better at this, I promise. The woman from the home swooped in to save me, and she said, here, let me take her. I'll get her cleaned up and get her some dry clothes. And I stepped aside to let the woman take Jeanette. And that's when she threw herself at me and clung tightly. And the woman said, I think you better do this. And I laughed and I cried, and I held this fierce little girl. She chose me. She chose me. And it was the most profound moment of my life. We received final approval, and we put our girls in the rental car and drove away. We gathered that afternoon in the lobby of the hotel with the other Haiti adoptive families, children playing in the center of a big circle of chairs. I watched as Violancia was visiting with another little friend, and they were looking at their parents and pointing, and the little girl pointed and said, "Es good." And Via looked back at her and said, "Es good." And then she reached her hands towards us and she said, "Lakai mwen." I knew it was a special moment, so I tucked that phrase away to look it up later. A quick Google search that night revealed that Via had reached her hands towards us and told her little friend, "These are my people." The next day, we flew home and we introduced our little girls to their big sisters. The story isn't about Mary Beth and Anna so much, but there have never been more loving, selfless, and dutiful big sisters ever. On February 5th, we got the call for John, and Thomas went to Miami alone. On February 10th, he met John, and on February 11th, he brought him home to us. Family complete? Check. Our lives have been tough and wonderful and tough and chaotic and loving and tough. We have been given so much joy. It has almost never been easy. Our house is never quiet, but it is always home. Last spring, the twins visited high schools, and I took Via to visit 3 colleges. She just finished her junior year. I remember at the beginning of the process telling Celeste, every month my Violence isn't home with me is a month closer to high school. And when she gets into high school, it'll go by in a blink and off she'll be to college. And I wasn't wrong. I'm sure I will spend most of the next year in tears over all the last times. I hope I can slow down and settle down enough to enjoy it. Honestly, I can't even imagine the twins in high school. It seems so common. Time flies. And sometimes even that doesn't seem adequate. But I have learned there is beauty and gift in the passage of time. All of my children have grown up. All of them will go out into the world. I need to remember that the fact that I have them to let go means that I had them in the first place. And for that, I will be forever grateful. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. Thank you so much. Our next storyteller has been a lawyer in Norfolk, Nebraska. I say Norfolk, not Norfolk. Norfolk, Nebraska, for over 50 years. When I asked him to sort of describe himself for us, here's what he said, and I quote, "Obviously old, and therefore has little energy, drive, or talent. But I'm trying, very trying." Please welcome to the stage one of my favorite people, Mr. Dennis Collins.
I don't think I said that, Dennis. You want to lower this just a little?
He said, "I don't think I said that."
It was much more erudite and witty. Okay, so roughly 76 years and 2 months and a couple days ago, roughly, a lovely young woman got off a bus in a small Nebraska village and handed the most handsome, studly, 2-week-old boy to another lovely young woman. And that's how I met my mother, adopted mother, Evelyn. So the subject of adoption, I thought and told Seth that deserved probably something more terrific, okay, than just telling a story. So I thought what we'd present maybe was Adoption the Musical. And so what I had in mind, I would be the star, and we'd have a backup chorus of the Andrews Sisters, and a pianist, Liberace, and me on an accordion. And then I would come out and I would sing the lead song, Adoption the Musical. Well, due to a lack of funds and talent, you won't have that tonight, okay? Maybe later. So my mother, Evelyn, she wasn't a nun, but that's how I'm going to refer to her. And some of these are jokes over here. And so she always told me I was adopted, which was very cool. And she also told me always, if you want to know who your birth mother is, I'm very happy to tell you. And I said, I'm okay. I'm okay. And so I never did ask, and I was okay. I grew up on a little farm south of this little village, and it was good. And so roughly 30 years later, Mother Evelyn said, Betty from Vermont is back visiting me. They had been friends in World War II, and I know you thought it was the War of 1812 probably, but she said, if you, Betty would like to go to lunch with you. Now, Betty had been back many times, and she'd seen our kids, and she'd been very pleasant and sweet and very nice person. Lived in Vermont. She had a daughter, and so I said, sure, that's fine. So we went to the cafe, and they giggled during the entire time, and then we just talked about not much. And I had to go to court just up the street, so I said, well, I got to go, and Betty was going to fly back to Vermont that afternoon. And so we walked on the street, and the cars are whizzing by, and I said, okay, we're at the court. Betty, it's good to see you, and I got to go in here. And Mother Evelyn said, well, Dennis, I just want you to know, Betty is your birth mother. Oh, good. Well, I got to go in here right now. Maybe we'll talk about this some other time, maybe. So that was the beginning, which was very short, but it had taken Evelyn many years to bring herself to actually force me to know this. And she loved Betty so much, she wanted me to know that. And then, so we would go visit Betty many times. She was a lovely person, had this absolutely sweet little cabin type house out in the country in Vermont. And the first time we went to see her, she said, I want to show you a family photo album. Her family was called White, the White family. And so she showed me all these pictures. And she came across one. She said, this is my father, my dad, he's gone now, but you look exactly like him. And I thought he had a big nose, but other than that, I thought, well, this is fine. I didn't mention that to her, so yeah. And then, so I'm thumbing through these photos, and right in the middle of all these photos is a section of me. Me is 3 months old, me is 6 months old, me is a year old, me in this ridiculous cowboy outfit at age 7. And so it was, I can't tell you what an effect that had on me, because I was perfectly happy in the other family and with the other family. But here's another family that thinks enough of me to put pictures of me in the middle of all these other people. So that was a really lovely experience. And we saw Betty for many years until she passed away. So once I'd met Betty, I thought, why doesn't anybody tell me who my father is, okay? Evelyn never mentioned, I'd love to have you know who your father is. And so, and Betty was always kind of reserved about the whole situation and didn't want to insert herself. So I went down to the courthouse, and of course I didn't know this guy's name. And I said to the court people that I know, and they knew me, I said, I just need to get into the vault. And they said, sure, go ahead. So I went back and opened the file cabinet for adoptions, and found mine. And so, like the opening of the photo album, you open a court file that's about you, that you've never seen. And in that, it told me my father's name. And his name was Ray Schneller. Now, I haven't been real fond of Dennis Collins, okay? But Dennis Schneller didn't smell right to me. So I was happier with my name, having discovered that. And I knew that the Hot Springs, Arkansas had been pretty much where everybody kind of knew each other. And so I went to, it was before the internet, and I went to the library, and they happened to have a phone book for Hot Springs, Arkansas. And I looked in there, it's an old phone book, and Ray Schneller is in there, and there's a phone number. Now, one of my big deals was whether he was still alive. My adoptive father, Everett, had passed away, and so, I wasn't sure. So I called that number, and a woman answered, and I said, "Is Ray Schneller there?" And she said, "Why, yes, he is." So that told me either he was alive or she'd had a really old corpse in the living room. And I said, "Okay, could I talk to him?" And she said, "Of course, who's calling?" And I said, "MasterCard." And she said, "Just a moment," and went to get him, and I hung up. So then my wife and I said, "Let's go to Hot Springs, Arkansas." So we had a couple friends, and we drove deliberately to Hot Springs, Arkansas, where I called Ray, and I said, "Ray, this is Dennis Collins, Evelyn and Everett's son." Well, he knew exactly who I was. And he said, "Oh, yeah." I said, "They were friends of yours in World War II." And, "Oh, yes, yes." He said, "Your dad and I had the same hospital room for arthritis." Take a look at my hands. And he said, "Yeah, that'd be great. Why don't you come out and see us?" And I said, "Okay." I said, "We just happened to be coming through. And we have some extra time. Because if you wouldn't have seen us, we're in a lot of trouble here." And so we went, and he was very generous. And his wife, Helen, they'd been married 40 years, and he showed me pictures of his mother, who he said I look like, and she's this tall, and and so then, but we never brought up the subject, okay? So then we got back in the car. It was interesting because there's movies of that, and we put our hands in the pockets the same way, and it's ridiculous. But anyway, so then we drove back, and I got back home, and I thought, well, I can't, this isn't really fair. He knows exactly who I am. I know exactly who he is. So I called him, and I said, "Ray, I think I'm your son." And there's this long pause, and he says, "Oh, I don't think so." I said, "Okay." And that's about it, other than talk about MasterCard. And so I said goodbye. Well, later I found out what the deal was. He had me on speakerphone, and Helen was in the room with him. And he had never told Helen that he'd been married before or that he had this kid, okay? And so then eventually I pestered him and said, "Let me come down, let me talk to Helen." So I went back probably 20 times. And every time Ray would tell me more about things, and primarily when Helen left the room. But so they had 3 children, and that's my half brothers and sister. And I said, I really would like to meet them. And Helen said, absolutely not. They have no idea your father was married before, and that he had another kid, for Pete's sake. And so I said, okay. Well, then their 50th wedding anniversary was coming around. And I said, would you invite me to that? Because I will not tell anybody who I am. I'll tell them I'm a friend of the family, and I get to meet my siblings. Would you do that? Well, it took a couple trips for Helen to agree, but she finally agreed. But she said, absolutely, you will not say who you are. And I said, okay. And so they had that in a Catholic church, and they annexed to the Catholic church. And so I went down, and when you walked in the room, there were these big armchairs, and for the royal couple 50th wedding anniversary. And Ray was seated in one, but Helen wasn't in the other one. She was in the back of the room. So I walked in. I said, Ray, I drove down. Oh, Dennis, come in here. Oh, I'm so glad to see you. He was very sweet. And he said, I want you to meet somebody. I said, okay. And so he took me over, and there was a woman, a younger woman, and he said, Mary Lou, I want you to meet your brother. And I thought, where in the heck is Helen? And I said, oh, Ray, this is not how this is supposed to happen. He said, oh, they're going to find out. It doesn't matter. Well, it did matter, of course. And Mary Lou, eventually, she thought I was illegitimate, first of all. There's another word for that. Other people would probably know that word. So once she found out the whole story, then she said, well, come over here. So then she took me and several of the other women into a room, and they want to know this story because they got something on Ray. Ray was not the nicest person to women, and now these women had something on Ray. So that experience, is different than Betty, but it still was very good and fulfilling to see all of these families. I'm still a very good friend of Mary Lou's, and we talk to each other a lot. So mainly I want to talk about when I was little, because I grew up on a farm, and across the road was this beautiful girl my age, okay? And we rode the bus together to this little school. And for 4 years in school, I was the only boy. There was about 4 or 5 other girls, including Jane. Jane, I was in love with Jane. And so in the 3rd grade, the teacher, Mrs. Schroeder, said, we're going to do Sleeping Beauty. We're going to put that on. And so we need a Prince Charming and a Sleeping Beauty. And I got to be Prince Charming. I know that's a surprise. But Jane was Sleeping Beauty. So Mrs. Schroeder said, okay, everybody put your heads down on the desk, and Prince Charming is going to kiss Jane. Now, Mrs. Schroeder wouldn't make it in today's world, okay? But so everybody, all the other girls put their heads down, and I got to kiss Jane and tried to wake her up. Jane immediately jumped up and said, yuck! I was heartbroken, okay? Talk about waking somebody up who didn't want to be woken, So on the bus that night home, I was, of course, distraught. And so Jane would get off normally first. We lived right across the road from each other. And it was the bus that had those racks above the seats. And I had a really lovely blue metal flat lunch bucket. And it was right above Jane's head. I thought, I believe this is called revenge. And I crashed it onto poor Jane's head. Yeah, that's how Jane felt about it too. She screamed, cried. The bus driver kicked me out to walk the 10 feet to my drive. And that night, Jane's father and mother and Jane came over, and I, of course, was in deep doo-doo. So I'm sure you are wondering, but Jane and I did not get married, okay? I'm sure the blue lunch bucket incident had something to do with that. Plus, even in Nebraska, 8-year-olds can't get married. But the main thing I want to point out is that when you're adopted, sometimes you just want to be loved, but maybe you don't quite know how to go about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Dennis. All right, our final storyteller for the night is a writer and a former theater artist who is now the safety manager of a local trucking company. She's also the 20th storyteller to take the stage this season. Yeah, 20 storytellers. Crazy, crazy. And she's just wonderful. Really going to enjoy her. Please welcome to the stage, Alanna Reeves.
In my early 20s, I toured with a children's theater company. We would arrive to a town on Sunday with our show in a box tucked into the back of our little red truck. And on Monday, we would hold auditions and cast up to 60 kids in our production. We would hold rehearsals over the next few days, and then on Friday or Saturday, we would have an hour-long musical theater production that the kids would perform for the community. Then we would pack everything up back into the back of that little truck, head on to the next town, and do the whole thing all over again. One week, we landed in a small town in central Nebraska. And as I looked out over the gymnasium where everyone had gathered to audition, there is one kid, I later learn his name is Josh, who looks completely out of place. Josh looks like he has stumbled into these auditions by accident on his way to the weight room. He is built like a pit bull. He is broad and low to the ground and all muscle. And additionally, at 17 years old, he is one of the older students gathered in this gymnasium. And his voice has already transitioned in this deep booming bass. I notice that there's another small child sitting next to him, and I assume that he has been tasked with chaperoning his little brother to these auditions. But we call all the children down, and down comes Josh from the bleachers to join the collection of kids waiting to be cast in our production of Alice in Wonderland. Josh's audition is wonderful. He is charming, and he's funny in kind of this understated way, and he's absolutely perfect to be cast as the March Hare in our production. We finish up with the auditions, and the principal comes down to congratulate me and my tour partner on a job well done, say what great classroom management skills we have. And then at the very end, he slides in with, oh, by the way, I just wanted to warn you that you should probably keep an eye on Josh. He tends to get himself into trouble. This is far from the first time that an administrator or an educator or even a community member has come up to us after an audition to warn us about a child that we have just cast in our show. At this point, I've been doing this job for about a year and a half, And I've discovered that one of my superpowers as a touring educator is that I get to drop in on these little towns and I have absolutely no preconceived notions about the children I'm about to work with. I don't know who their parents are. I don't know what their home life is like. I don't know how well they did in school last year. The other thing that I'm not privy to, or maybe subject to, is this thing that sometimes happens within school systems, and I hate to say, particularly in small towns, where a child has a rough year and then the second grade teacher tells the third grade teacher, who tells the fourth grade teacher, who tells the fifth grade teacher, hey, watch out for that one. The other thing that I've learned while doing this job for about a year and a half is that given the opportunity of a fresh start, most kids rise to the occasion. Josh is no exception. He is warm and engaging. He is excellent with the little kids in the show. He actually ends up spending his lunch breaks not socializing with a handful of other kids his age, but actually helping me and my tour partner, Joe, to wrangle and entertain all of the early elementary kids. He ends up mentoring the 5-year-old dormouse in our production. The dormouse has a really hard time not remembering his lines, but remembering when to say them. And so Josh pulls the dormouse off to the sidelines and works with him while Joe and I are working with the other kids on different scenes. Josh eventually even invents a bit to help the dormouse remember when to say the lines in the show. Every time that Josh reaches for the teapot across the table, this is a physical cue for the dormouse to jostle awake and deliver his lines. And as the March hare, Josh always responds to the dormouse waking up by acting as if he's been very startled, and he bounces up out of his seat. And this is lovely because it helps the dormouse to remember when to say his lines, and it also adds another layer of physical comedy to the scene. As if all of this isn't enough, Josh is there early every day to help us set up. He stays late to help us clean up, to help us put the set up, to help us load things in and out of the pickup truck. All the while, he has his little brother in tow with him everywhere he goes. Spending all this extra time with Josh this week, I get to learn a little bit about his life. His mother is a nurse in the little rural hospital the next town over. She works the night shift because that shift pays more. Josh's father is no longer in the picture and hasn't been for quite some time. This means that Josh is primarily responsible for caring for his little brother, particularly in the evenings when his mother is away at work, but during the summertime, also during the days when his mother is trying to sleep. Josh says that he doesn't get a whole lot of time to socialize with other kids his age, and in fact, this is one of the only extracurricular activities that he gets to participate in because his little brother can participate too. It sounds like Josh does a lot of adulting for his age. As the week goes on, Josh continues to be a model participant. We do run into one problem with Josh, though. And that is that there is absolutely no way that his 17-year-old linebacker frame is going to fit into our costume. I asked Josh to stay behind on Tuesday because I know this is probably going to be an issue. And the thing is that our theater company is actually very smart about the way that they design costumes. They can be cinched down to fit a fifth grader, but are also typically roomy enough that they can pass on a senior in high school. But I don't think the costume designers had this particular senior in high school in mind when they were designing this costume. So we go over to the costume bag and I pull out the costume, and it is immediately comically obvious that there's no way that Josh's broad shoulders are going to fit into this narrow suit jacket. The Chris Farley scene from Tommy Boy, you know, the fat guy, and it was kind of like that scene comes to mind. It's just not going to happen. And Josh is laughing and he says, "It's fine. I never fit into the costumes." And he say, "Wait a minute, what?" Josh tells me that he's been performing in our shows since the 5th grade and he's never fit into one of our costumes. He says, it's fine. I'll just bring something from home. That's what I normally do. And I say, no. This year, you are getting a custom designed costume. Josh insists that this is not necessary. I insist, oh, but yes, it is necessary. And I start to hype up how incredible Josh is going to look in this costume. And this is where my second problem of the week comes in, because I don't sew. I have never made a costume. And I have no idea how I am going to deliver on this promise, but I am determined to do so. My third problem of the week occurs when I discover that we are in a town so rural that there's not even a Walmart within an hour's drive. Fuel prices are roughly about what they are right now, and our touring theater company is begging of us to conserve our gas as much as we can. So I start asking around and I'm saying, okay, where can I find some clothing options? Because I have pieced together in my mind that if I can just find a long-sleeved button-down shirt, that I think I can MacGyver together the rest of this costume. Somebody in the community tells me, there is an Alco, yes, 2 towns over. So I think, okay, we'll give it a shot. We'll see what they have at Alco. So I hop in the truck and I drive 2 towns over. My fourth problem of the week happens because we are in the height of summer. And when I walk into that Alco, it is small and it is very clear that they need to rotate out their seasonal clothing options pretty quickly. I'm looking around the men's section and I am not finding a long-sleeved anything. And I'm starting to kind of panic a little bit because my entire costume design relies on me being able to find a long-sleeve button-down shirt. And just as I'm about to give up hope and try to figure out what plan B is, I see a clearance rack back in the corner, and I spy on it what looks like a brown plaid flannel shirt. And I start walking toward the clearance rack, and I start muttering under my breath, please be at least a large, please be a large, please be a large, please be a large. And I pull it off of the rack, and I look at the tag, and it reads men's XL, and I breathe a huge sigh of relief. I finally have this base piece that I'm going to figure out how to make the rest of this costume around. So I wander the Alco. I find that despite having limited clothing options, they do have a crafting section. And in that crafting section, I pick up a travel sewing kit. And I find that they also have fat quarters, which are like scraps of fabric that are used for quilting. And I find some that have kind of a bright, punchy, colorful Alice in Wonderland vibe. I snag those, and I'm looking around for anything that might pass as suit buttons, and I'm coming up short on that. But I asked the cashier as I'm checking out if maybe I just overlooked something. And she says, no, we don't have anything like that here, but there's a scrapbooking store the next town over, which may have what you're looking for. I thank her, I scoop up my things, and I, within the realms of the speed limit, hurry like the Dickens to get over to this next town because it's getting late in the afternoon, early evening. Small towns, I don't know how late this place is open. I pull up to the scrapbooking store, and I arrive just as they are closing up for the night. I stop the woman who is in the process of locking the front door. I tell her my plight. I said, please, I just need like 2 buttons. Just help me out. She was very generous. We went inside. We found a couple of these silvery suit buttons. They were perfect. Thank her, and I head back to the hotel with all of these things that I've gathered. I spend every spare moment of this week trying to hand sew this costume together. I remove all of the original buttons from the shirt. I figure out that if I kind of fold the top parts up like a V, I can make a faux lapel. I starch the heck out of it and iron it all out. And then I take those fat quarters and I sew them into the lapel of this shirt. I put on little faux pockets with also the fat quarter fabric. And of course, I add the final touches, the buttons. It's here in the story that I will remind you, I don't sew. This is a new adventure for me. And I am really banking on the fact that there's a pretty good distance from the stage to the audience, so maybe nobody else will see all of my blunders. Additionally, I have a little bit of trepidation about this because I have hyped up to a 17-year-old that I'm going to make him look really cool. And I think it'll pass. I finally finish this costume up at 3 a.m. the morning before our dress rehearsal. We lay out all the costumes in the brown paper bags that all of the kids have brought to rehearsal for this express purpose. And when Josh pulls his suit jacket out of his costume bag, he absolutely lights up. He rushes over to me and crushes me in this big bear hug, and he says, thank you, this is so much cooler than the original. And off he jets to the locker rooms to get ready for our show. Josh absolutely shone during his performance. His comedic timing is perfection. His bit with the dormouse goes over so well that we actually end up permanently incorporating it into the show, teaching it to all of the other kids that we encounter for the rest of that summer. Josh's performance is great, but the most beautiful thing about it is that he never steals anyone else's thunder on that stage. He makes sure that everyone else around him is shining just as brightly as he is. He even ad-libs some lines to bring the Mad Hatter back around when they started going off script in the middle of the tea party scene. When Josh takes his final bows, he is absolutely beaming, and I hope that he is half as proud of himself that week as I am of him. After the performance, Josh brings his mother down to introduce us to each other, and he says, this is the lady who made this awesome costume. Can you believe she made something so wild just out of like some weird flannel shirt? I tell him that it was absolutely my pleasure to make it, that he deserved it, and that I really kind of enjoyed the challenge of figuring out how to put it together. Of course, Josh stays after to help us take down the set, start packing everything away to get headed on to the next town. And as he is taking down the set with my tour partner, Joe, he says to him that this has been his best week all year. He wants to know about becoming a tour actor. He knows that he's a really good actor, and he knows that he's excellent at working with kids, and he wants to be able to do both someday. He wants to know how to have our job. Joe talks to Josh about studying theater in college, and Josh gets a little quiet, and then he says that he doesn't think that that's possible. You see, his grades aren't very good, and he's been getting himself into a bit of trouble lately. He tells my tour partner that this is the first week all year that he hasn't had anything to drink. This experience was really important to him, and he didn't want any chance of screwing it up. Joe, taken a little aback, asks Josh if his mother knows about this drinking problem, and Josh says that yes, she does. And they are working on it, but given their circumstances, it's a little tricky because after he gets his brother to sleep, he's pretty much left to his own devices most nights. Josh says he doesn't get a lot of opportunities to socialize with other kids his age, and he says that even when he does, it's really hard for him in this small town. He can't find anywhere to fit in. Joe asks him if maybe he can participate in the school play this year, just to give himself something to hang on to get through his senior year. And Josh tells Joe that there is no school play. There's no school play. There's no community theater anywhere close. There's just us, once a year. Joe does his best to convince Josh that there is a whole world of opportunities just waiting for him. All he has to do is get through his senior year. It's been roughly 15 years since we landed in that small town in the middle of nowhere, Nebraska. And I never heard from or saw Josh ever again. But I think about him often. I have often wondered if Josh's trouble was simply that he was way too big for the small town that he was in, much in the same way that he was way too big for our standard issued costume. I wondered if Josh looked around in that small town and he just couldn't find any roles that were a good fit. And I wonder constantly what happened to Josh after graduation. And I don't know, but whatever life he created, I hope he didn't just settle for the most obvious or standard issued options. I hope that he designed a life that was a custom fit, even if he had to MacGyver it together from disparate scraps. And I really hope that whatever he created, he thinks it is so much cooler than his original options. Thank you.
She gets me every time with that one. Just a beautiful story. Wow. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you so much for embracing the power of life storytelling. If you've been following us all season, thank you so much. Because I really do feel like this is such a powerful and important art form. As we all know, we're living in some very difficult times. And I think it's so important for us to connect, for us to learn about reconnecting. And I think we're doing that. So thank you again. Please, a big round of applause for all of our storytellers tonight. And you have a great night. Thank you again for coming.